Do not judge, or you too will be judged. It is one of the most widely recognized statements in modern culture. Repeated so often, we rarely stop to ask what it actually means. Today, these words are frequently deployed as a conversation ender. When someone points out a wrongdoing or asks for accountability, the phrase is pulled out to immediately shut the discussion down. This modern reflex relies on an assumption that Jesus was instructing people to completely stop recognizing right from wrong. We treat the command as a directive to abandon all moral discernment. When these words are used as a shield, the focus remains entirely outward. But the context of this statement suggests a different focus, one that turns the attention away from the conversation and toward the internal mechanics of the person speaking. The true target of this command has very little to do with how we speak to others. The focus is on a temptation lurking within our own minds. There is a distinct psychological reward to judgment. When we fixate on another person's anger, their hypocrisy, or their mistakes, we artificially inflate our own sense of spiritual superiority. We feel better about ourselves simply by looking at someone else's failure. We quickly become experts at diagnosing the flaws of other people, while remaining intentionally blind to those exact same problems within ourselves. Jesus is pointing past the person being criticized and addressing the self-righteousness of the critic. We operate with a double standard. We demand rigid accountability for everyone else, but expect limitless grace for ourselves. When someone else loses their temper, we call them immature. When we lose our temper, we say we were under pressure. When someone else makes a mistake, we question their core character. When we make the exact same mistake, we point to the external situation. When someone else fails, we remember it. When we fail, we ask for the failure to be forgotten. We have built an architecture of measurement designed to condemn our neighbors while acquitting ourselves. This is the precise point in Matthew chapter 7 where Jesus completely flips the dynamic directly onto the listener. He says, "For with the judgment you use, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you." The yardstick we constructed for others becomes the metric applied to our own lives. This structural reversal transforms a moral platitude into an inescapable personal trap. In a single sentence, the judge is moved into the defendant's seat. The heavy mirror pivots around. The moral examination shifts entirely away from the brother and lands directly on the self. We often worry about seeing too much sin in the world around us, yet fixating on the flaws of others often leaves us unable to see what is corrupted inside our own hearts. We see their problems with perfect clarity and see nothing of our own. People treat "do not judge" as an instruction on polite speech. In reality, it is an urgent warning about how we perceive our own internal state. To ensure this truth cannot be ignored, Jesus introduces a vivid and absurd metaphor. He describes two specific objects, a microscopic speck of dust in someone else's eye and a massive wooden plank lodged in our own. The scale discrepancy between a tiny fleck of sawdust and a massive piece of timber highlights the nature of our own self-deception. This strange looming picture serves as the ultimate exposure of human hypocrisy, setting the stage to uncover exactly what that plank represents. Picture walking up to a friend. You notice something in their eye, a tiny piece of dust, a small speck. You lean in and say, "Let me help you get that out." The problem is the sheer physical logistics of the situation. As you lean in for this delicate extraction, you're practically smashing them with a massive wooden plank sticking directly out of your own face. Your words sound helpful. Your offer sounds compassionate. But the reality is, you are completely blind, wielding a blunt hazard, trying to perform optical surgery. When Jesus first painted this picture for his listeners, He was leaning heavily into absurdity. He wanted people to picture the clumsy, swinging timber. He wanted them to laugh. Laughter is an incredibly effective tool for disarming an audience. It acts as a Trojan horse, slipping right past our natural psychological defenses. But then the laughter dies down. The image settles in. And there is a jarring shift where you suddenly realize that ridiculous carpenter is me. We do this constantly. We lock onto a minor flaw in someone else's life, their sudden impatience in a meeting, and completely ignore the massive, blinding pride sitting in our own hearts. We have an almost supernatural ability to spot a coworker's hypocrisy from across the room, while neatly filing away our own secret compromises as completely justified. That hyper-awareness of everyone else's minor failings isn't actually a sign of sharp observation. It is a symptom of a massive structural blindness to what is happening inside ourselves. Now, Jesus never says the speck is an illusion. The dust is real. The other person's flaw or failure or sin exists, and it might genuinely need to be addressed. The error of the plank-eye surgeon is trying to fix the external problem in someone else before checking the internal condition of the person doing the surgery. Look at this balance scale representing how we interact with others. Truth is on one side, humility on the other. Take humility away, and truth drops fast, morphing into a jagged shape. A tool for correction becomes an act of condemnation. Truth delivered without love stops being a surgical instrument for healing. It becomes a weapon for damage. You can have the facts entirely on your side. You can hold the absolute moral high ground. But if your underlying motive is to tear someone down rather than restore them, your factual accuracy is incredibly dangerous. This forces us to look past the act of pointing out a flaw and audit the hidden psychological motive driving us to point it out in the first place. The uncomfortable reality is that we often don't bring up a friend's failure because we love them and want to help them. We bring it up because their failure makes us feel superior. It feeds a quiet internal monologue. I would never make a mistake like that. I know better. I am more faithful. I am more mature. You can see the mechanism in this chart. We actively use the failures of others as building materials for our own ego. As the person next to us shrinks down, we grow taller in direct proportion, feeding entirely on their misstep. Eagerly hunting for a speck of dust in someone else's eye is rarely about cleanliness. It is a self-serving mechanism designed to mask our own deep-seated spiritual pride. The only effective method for removing the plank is to accept a difficult reality. We are in desperate, continuous need of grace ourselves. Every single human being walks around with blind spots. We all have glaring weaknesses. We all have decisions we desperately wish we could erase. The spatial geometry of grace is completely flat. At the foot of the cross, the ground is entirely level. There is no hierarchy. When you finally begin to fully grasp your own profound need for forgiveness, the illusion of moral superiority simply collapses into dust. Internalizing that need for grace alters how you physically and spiritually posture yourself toward the people around you. In this diagram of spiritual pride, the posture is judgment, standing directly above and casting a shadow. But aware of our own need for mercy, we step down. We remove the shadow, standing beside them as a fellow patient. True spiritual maturity is not achieved by proving you are better than everyone else. It is found by trading the weapon of condemnation for the shared reality of grace. We all have a deeply ingrained reflex to spot what is wrong with the people around us. When we see a flaw, our immediate impulse is to point it out and step in to fix it. But if you've ever tried this, you know exactly how it usually ends. Instead of receiving your wisdom, the other person puts up a wall. The conversation devolves into defensiveness, resentment, and a fractured relationship. It raises a fascinating question about human nature. Why does an act meant to be helpful almost always turn into a hostile exchange? Correction turns toxic when it becomes a tool to hide what is happening inside ourselves. The word hypocrite refers to an actor wearing a mask. It is the image of a performer projecting one reality to the audience, while something entirely different is happening behind the curtain. We see this play out in performative religion. People will do objectively good things, giving to the poor, praying, or fasting, but they are seeking the wrong audience. They want the applause and the attention of the crowd. This audience-seeking impulse turns toxic when we direct it at other people. We become experts at identifying external sins in our friends or family members to avoid the discomfort of our own. It is possible to quote moral standards or even Bible verses while remaining entirely controlled by pride. We can use the language of holiness as a shield to protect our own refusal to repent. Critiquing the failures of the people around us is the ultimate defense mechanism. As long as we are focused on their weakness, we never have to endure the pain of looking inward. Jesus addressed this dynamic with a piece of shocking imagery. He described a person trying to surgically extract a tiny piece of sawdust from someone else's eye, while ignoring a massive wooden plank lodged in their own. It is easy to misread this metaphor of a command to stay quiet, to passively ignore the flaws of others, and pretend that their mistakes do not matter. But the instruction hinges on a single word of timing. First, take the plank out of your own eye. He does not say never, he says first. The command turns correction into a strict matter of sequencing. Authentic correction is an order of operations. If you attempt to skip to the end without completing the required steps, you corrupt the entire process. That required first step demands a rigorous inward look. Before you confront someone, you have to pause, pray, and allow your own heart to be examined by God. Before you tell someone else what they need to change, you must ask what needs to change in you. You have to ask for mercy before you demand improvement from anyone else. Looking inward destroys the theatrical mask. It exposes your own deep need for grace. When you have stood before God and admitted your own brokenness, you cannot approach someone else with arrogant pride. This inward pivot does not make us weak or passive. Instead, it burns away the hypocrisy that poisons our ability to speak the truth. The person who skips the first step will almost always confront your pride with their own. But a person who has actually experienced the weight of their own failures and felt the relief of being forgiven will approach a broken human being entirely differently. They will still speak the truth and directly confront the sin, but they do it with humility and speak those words with peers. Facing our own flaws is the only way to transform from antagonist into a trustworthy guide. The two paths end in completely different places. The hypocrite corrects to win an argument. The humble person corrects to heal a life. Removing the plank of pride results in clearer vision. Only then can we see what the other person actually needs to move forward. The goal of correction is not humiliation. It is helping someone else see clearly enough to be restored. There is a famous teaching from Jesus that almost everyone has heard. First, take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Often, people hear this and walk away with a specific conclusion. They assume the lesson is a mandate to leave everyone alone, stay out of people's business, and entirely abstain from judgment. But the sentence doesn't stop at the plank. It moves forward with a specific bridge. Then you will see clearly. He doesn't say walk away. The instruction still expects us to speak the truth, to encourage holiness, and directly confront destructive behaviors. We are required to intervene when someone is hurting themselves or others. But attempting that intervention before completing the chronological prerequisite ensures we will cause harm rather than healing. So why do our interventions fail? It comes down to unchecked internal conditions like pride, anger, bitterness, and self-righteousness. These emotional states act like warped optical filters. As our perception passes through, our vision scatters and bends, losing coherence. We only perceive a person's sharpest failures, what they did wrong, while the central truth of their humanity is blocked out. We become hyper-fixated on their past actions, making it impossible to recognize what they actually need in the present, grace, and the potential of what God might still do in their life. When our own unhealed wounds dictate our vision, our assessment of others is invalid. We aren't observing objective reality at all. We are simply projecting our own deeply rooted pain onto someone else. Think about stepping into someone's life to confront a destructive habit, the same way you would think about performing a delicate, invasive surgery. No rational person would allow a doctor to operate on them if that surgeon had compromised, chaotic vision. The risk of slipping is too high. Spiritually, the logic is identical. Before we attempt to cut the sickness out of someone else's life, we have to step away from the operating table and submit to our own internal examination. It is easy to look at someone else and pray, "Lord, change them." It is a far more difficult necessity to pray, "Show me what I cannot see in myself." But that internal exposure is safe. God does not reveal our hidden flaws to destroy or shame us. He exposes our brokenness as a diagnostic tool for our own healing. A patient can never be safely cured until the physician treating them is capable of seeing the wound clearly. This leads back to that sequence of healing. This is the aftermath of the internal audit, what happens after the plank is finally removed. Spiritual maturity is not the process of becoming blind or indifferent to bad behavior. It is not pretending that flaws don't exist. Look at this representation of a perfectly aligned lens. It shows the true baseline for maturity, the capacity to identify failure with absolute, unhypocritical clarity, starting explicitly with ourselves. Once that internal alignment happens, our behavior shifts. We become slower to condemn. We use careful language, and we approach human weakness with elevated compassion, illuminating the fragile parts of a person without burning them. That transformed internal state turns the interpersonal dynamic from an adversarial attack into a restorative partnership. Willingly submitting to the healing of our own vision is what enables us to genuinely help someone change without becoming their judge. Do not judge. In modern culture, those three words are often used as an absolute shield, a quick way to shut down a conversation and declare that all behaviors are equally acceptable. But the actual text collapses that interpretation just a few sentences later. Almost immediately, Jesus delivers a strict warning to watch out for false prophets. He tells his followers to look closely at these individuals and evaluate their fruit, the tangible moral output of their lives, to determine their true character. By verse 6, the metaphors become even sharper. Jesus explicitly instructs his audience to recognize destructive people, labeling them dogs and swine, and to withhold sacred things from them. This creates a jarring tension. A follower cannot practice total moral blindness while simultaneously being ordered to identify wolves and protect the sacred. Either the source text contains a massive contradiction, or our modern definition of this rule is missing a critical variable. Rather than teaching moral blindness, Jesus calls for a specific, active skill, discernment. Without this skill, societies drift toward two extremes. The first is total apathy, where we pretend destructive actions don't have consequences. On the other side is absolute condemnation, where anyone who disagrees is deemed entirely evil. This leaves a massive, unstable gap in the middle. Discernment acts as the stabilizer. It's the only mechanism allowing someone to hold firm convictions without slipping into cruelty. The opposite of moral blindness is discernment, the ability to speak truth clearly without treating the person in front of you as an enemy. We can see the difference by comparing how condemnation and discernment operate in real time. Condemnation attacks the identity of the individual, declaring them worthless at their core. Discernment targets the action, identifying specific behaviors as destructive while leaving the person's humanity intact. Condemnation is a finality. It decides a person is a lost cause and permanently removes hope. Discernment demands change specifically because it believes a better future is possible. These two approaches stem from opposite motives. Condemnation is driven by a desire for superiority. Discernment seeks only the truth. The final outcomes are equally distinct. Condemnation seeks to utterly destroy. Discernment seeks restoration and healing. Ultimately, the difference is intent. One evaluates behavior to tear down, while the other evaluates behavior to rebuild. In daily life, this requires a difficult balance, holding truth and grace at the same time. It means having a deep compassion for a person without abandoning the discernment to see when their actions are harmful. Practicing this is not instinctual. It requires profound, deliberate wisdom and self-control. We have to reject the idea that love means endless arguing, or that courage requires cruelty. A sign of spiritual maturity is knowing that not every argument needs a winner, and not every conversation is worth continuing. Sometimes the absolute most powerful expression of truth is simply delivering it, and then deliberately choosing to step back. Ultimately, discernment is the practiced wisdom of knowing exactly when to speak, when to listen, and when to walk away. When someone attacks a truth you hold deeply, the immediate instinct is to fight back. You want to plant your feet, raise your voice, and defend your position against the incoming noise. We live in a digital and cultural landscape that treats every comment section, every family dinner, and every passing criticism as a mandatory debate stage. The unwritten rule we've all absorbed is that ignoring an accusation is identical to losing the argument. Engaging in this constant, reactive defense carries a severe cost. It drains your spiritual energy, fractures your internal peace, and consistently drags you into loud, circular conflicts that produce no resolution. We keep showing up to these fights because of a stubborn misconception, the belief that refusing to engage is a sign of weakness or a lack of conviction in the truth. 2 millennia ago, Jesus provided a framework for handling conflict that counters this modern compulsion to always respond. He gave his disciples a highly specific instruction: do not cast your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet and turn and tear you in pieces. Treating every single provocation as a mandatory battle to be won doesn't honor the sacred truths you hold. It recklessly wastes them. Think of what a pearl is: valuable, fragile, slowly cultivated. This metaphor refers to the internal assets God entrusts to you: your truth, your peace, and your energy. These resources are finite. They require strict boundaries and intentional management for survival. The tool required to manage these reserves is spiritual discernment. In practical terms, discernment is the ability to accurately read the true intent behind an argument. Discernment divides people into 2 distinct categories. The first are the seekers. These are individuals who might fiercely disagree with you or ask difficult questions, but beneath that friction, they possess a genuine hunger to learn. When you encounter seekers, they are worthy of your energy. They deserve patient, deep, and continuous engagement because they are capable of receiving what you share. Effective discernment starts by recognizing that friction itself isn't always an attack. Sometimes that friction is the sound of someone genuinely searching for understanding. Then there are the mockers. These are the individuals the metaphor warns about. Their underlying intent isn't to learn. They are actively seeking to provoke, to humiliate, and to turn sacred concepts into a joke. Sharing your truth with a bad faith actor does not change their mind. It simply hands them the exact ammunition needed to trample your values and tear you down. Jesus himself demonstrated how to handle this. Despite having answers to any challenge, he famously withheld responses to specific questions or accusations. When faced with individuals who were demonstrably trying to trap him or mock his authority, he actively used silence as a response. This silence functioned as a precise calculation, calibrated entirely on the audience's condition of heart. It is impossible to build a constructive, meaningful dialogue with someone whose only objective is demolition. This requires a shift in how we navigate the world. Not every disagreement is a form of persecution, and absolutely not every online accusation or cynical comment deserves an explanation. Choosing to step back from a toxic, circular debate demonstrates a command over your own resources. It is the exercise of supreme wisdom. This flowchart lays out a rule for sharing truth. Speak when speaking can build. Listen when listening can heal. But the moment you see that continuing will only produce destruction, you step away. It is possible to maintain a genuine love for someone while simultaneously refusing to continue an argument with them. Wisdom isn't limited to knowing the exact argument to make. Sometimes it is possessing the power to know when to say nothing at all. It is effortless to spend our time singling out the flaws in other people. When we focus outward, faith can easily become a tool for identifying everyone else's problems. This mindset offers a sense of superiority. We position ourselves above broken people, diagnosing their failures from a safe distance. Asking what is wrong with them might make us feel correct, but a culture built on condemnation rarely fixes the underlying brokenness. We can break this cycle by pausing before we diagnose others to look into a mirror. This mirror reflects the internal state, the actual condition of the heart. It poses a disruptive question. Before you tell others what is wrong, what do you see in yourself? An honest inventory often reveals surface-level flaws we usually ignore: pride, anger, bitterness. If we keep looking, we find relational issues like jealousy, unforgiveness, or the sins we prefer to keep hidden. At the center, we often find a need to be admired or a drive to feel superior to those around us. Recognizing these unsurrendered wounds shifts the ego's focus. The question moves from, "What is wrong with them?" to, "Lord, what are you trying to show me?" Changing that question alters how we see our place in the world. It challenges the assumption that we are better than the people we are judging. We realize that we have no standing to look down on another person's brokenness. This diagram shows the truth that levels the playing field. We are all broken people. The only difference is that we have encountered grace. When we remember how many times we have failed and how many times we were lifted back up, we become more patient with the failures of others. Acknowledging the scale of our own forgiveness changes the speed at which we condemn our neighbors. Once we have looked inward, our view of other people changes. Humility does not mean we ignore the truth or refuse to address wrong actions. As the scale shows, true humility involves confronting the action while refusing to elevate yourself above the person. This allows us to call an action wrong while explicitly admitting our own need for grace. We call darkness darkness only because we remember needing someone to bring light into our own lives. A shift occurs when we stop trying to prove that we are right. We start looking for ways to help the other person see the truth and experience the same grace we received. This approach aligns our intentions with the heart of Jesus. We move away from the default impulse to judge and toward a desire to see people healed. This change in perspective separates the act of judgment from the work of restoration. We all have a natural instinct to keep a running tally of other people's mistakes. We carry anger, store up a mental ledger of their missteps, and quietly wait for them to fail again. When someone slips up, we immediately look at their track record. We convince ourselves that because we can see a few of their past failures, we understand their entire story. We think we have perfect clarity. Look at this measuring stick. It plots out discrete data points along a timeline, turning a person's recorded mistakes into a strict logical ledger. We use this tool to see how we stack up against them, establishing a toxic hierarchy of moral superiority, rather than offering any genuine correction. But notice what happens as this timeline expands. The tight focus on those negative data points completely blacks out the rest of the timeline. The paradox here is that this measuring stick doesn't reveal the truth. Relying on a tiny fraction of a person's life creates a deep cognitive and spiritual blindness. When we isolate a single failure and separate it from the rest of a life, we stop seeing a mistake and start defining a person. That definition is where shame takes root, turning a moment of healing into a permanent barrier that pushes people away. Relying on our own fragmented perception to judge others is never a pursuit of objective truth. It is a profound vision problem, and it destroys relationships. In Matthew chapter 7, Jesus addresses this exact problem. His instruction to judge not is often read as a simple moral command, but read sequentially, verses 1 through 6 offer a highly specific diagnostic sequence for human interaction. The primary mechanism of this sequence is about fixing our distorted optics. Watching this warped lens twist and finally snap into focus illustrates the requirement. Before addressing another person's fault, we have to extract the plank of our own unexamined arrogance. Practically, this requires pausing before you speak. Before you expose someone else's failure, you must let God expose yours. Before you correct someone, you have to pray for humility. There is a sharp contrast between our natural reflexes and this command. The instinct is to speak harsh truth out of arrogance. The requirement is to speak truth governed entirely by love. Truth delivered without self-examination or love operates as a weapon. It destroys the person it claims to help, regardless of how righteous the speaker feels. The hesitation here is usually about standards. If we drop our judgment, do we have to abandon truth? Are we supposed to ignore real behavioral faults? This diagram shows the turning point. Right now, one individual sits high above another on a vertical hierarchy. Taking the plank out of your eye doesn't blind you to the other person's faults. Instead, it removes the distortion of superiority. It rotates the relationship so both people rest equally on a shared horizontal plane, allowing you to view those faults with compassion. As a bridging line connects them on this equal footing, our perception shifts. We stop seeing people as enemies, as projects to be fixed, or as inferiors. We start seeing them as human beings. This shifts the goal of correction into a mutual invitation toward God. It is a shared journey where neither person is fixing the other, because both recognize their own need for mercy. True clarity is never achieved by scrutinizing someone else's flaws more closely. It is achieved by removing the ego that obscures our own. The reality is, human optics are severely limited. We are only capable of seeing a person's visible past. God possesses the exclusive ability to see the internal state of the heart. This brings us to a problem of jurisdiction. Looking at this empty judge's chair reminds us that our calling is strictly to follow Jesus. We do not have the authority to occupy the throne of the ultimate judge. When we interact with people, we are always sending one of two internal messages. We can send the destructive message that says, "You are the problem," or we can send the restorative message that says, "We both need God's grace." Every person shares the exact same human condition. We are all equally in need of mercy, forgiveness, truth, and grace. We have to stop asking the outward accusatory question. We have to stop pointing and asking, "What is wrong with them?" Instead, a new internal question must precede all correction. Lord, what are you showing me? Meaningful change starts within the boundaries of our own hearts. It begins by accepting that the first person God wants to change isn't the person in front of us, it's us. The prayer that shifts our perspective and restores our relationships starts with 3 simple words: Lord, change me.